Yes, sir.
Is this break time, or are you?
Well, officially the break is after me, but we can be pretty flexible on schedule. Should we take a vote? Good time for a break, or let me rip through this? Continue? Alrighty. Hajime. So, my name is Michael Dexter, and I've been somewhat behind the scenes on bhyve, getting documented and promoted. And you can find me online in various ways, on Twitter, and hopefully at times giving a voice to developers when they want to hide behind consoles. So today I'm going to talk about some provisioning steps I've been doing, all for the purpose of testing bhyve. So this has been an evolution over, gosh, nearly a decade. Some time ago I experimented with jails and thought, okay, I absolutely admire the fact that you can contain things like lamp stacks and giant software sets and delete them with one command, as opposed to find out why this integrated behemoth is failing. So some time ago, about 2005, I started an RC framework to create disk images and even have images within images for different like user partitions and such. All the stuff I could imagine in data sets, but had no ZFS at my disposal at the time. And that had its shortcomings. So FreeBSD 5 introduced quite a few jail management tools like JLS and even an official framework that very few people are aware of. And unfortunately, FreeBSD 5 proved quite explosive for my purposes, and some of that may have been due to images being corrupted in various subtle ways, and that taking the entire kernel with it. So jail itself, of course, is of limited scope, which Takuya touched on. It's a great tool, it's lightweight, it's elegant, and I experimented with Compat Linux, hoping that, well, maybe I can get some amount of bootstrapping of other OSs up, but that didn't get too far. PCBSD has done some remarkable things with the warden in that department. So also, there's a long-term problem that installers are generally throughout BSD and intended to be used every 2 years when you get a new laptop. So no matter how painful they are, at least it's a brief period where you get it working, maybe try different GPT and MBR, whatever your laptop's friendly with, and don't deal with it for some time. But that's limiting in, say, an environment where perhaps you're doing virtual servers and you need to do 200 installations per day instead of, say, one every 2 years. Kudos again to PCBSD for a very logical desktop-oriented installer. It asks you the right questions and avoids the wrong ones, and is OEM and allows you to simply put in a new user upon first boot and other great things, which is appreciated. So I touched on that management structure. There were various config files for Etsy, and I don't know if it was a shortcoming in documentation, but I didn't get too far with them. And most people say, well, use EasyJail, which is a good tool, but it's certainly not an in-base tool. And after that experience, I did some exploration with Kristaps, a colleague of mine, and we produced sysjail and OpenBSD and NetBSD. It was a systrace-based jail that allowed a non-intrusive jail to be put on top of the existing base system. Unfortunately, that suffered from a concurrency issue that Robert Watson pointed out. And that led to the Malloc project, which is a fully pluralized upper half of the kernel, such that there are multiple init instances and they're not aware of each other, and that was an interesting research project, and people occasionally knock on my door looking for that code. It was all based on NetBSD 3.1 at the time because it was very small and efficient and clean. And I actually used NetBSD Zen to host that. And it proved remarkably stable. And apparently they're running Windows, and it's a bit of a best-kept secret on NetBSD that hasn't received the attention it should get. And as Peter elegantly put, there was compressing his slides, there was an agreement at both MeetBSD and various BSD cans that we need a hypervisor. Zen as a host is almost there on FreeBSD, and thanks to EC2, Colin Percival has been doing some very good guest support under Zen. We're almost there, but in the time that's passed, we've come up with a full hypervisor. So, surprise, along came bhyve, initially with somewhat brutal camel case, but now it's been simplified to bhyve, the BSD hypervisor, and that history has been covered nicely today. So my goal was to stress test bhyve in various ways. Somehow I was one of the first people to knock on Neil and Peter's door and say, hey, that was a really cool presentation. How do I try this? And they said, oh, here's the napkin with our notes on how to use it. And I asked lots and lots of questions and documented everything I could. And back then it was it's always been a moving target, but it was something you manually built as a full tree, but I found ways to build it a la carte within FreeBSD 9. And as Peter pointed out, you dealt with the hard provisioning of 100% CPU usage per bhyve process, hard RAM pre-allocation deducted from the host system, and I like to say that the good news is bhyve arrived perfectly, but the bad news is it didn't arrive perfectly for any of our cool uses. So fortunately, that's all changed over the years. But above all, I just want simple ways to create virtual machines and do clever things to break them. So I've seen a lot of panics and hopefully shielded all of you from those panics. And I sure hope my help has been in some way useful. So again, limitations, installers were designed to be used every 2 years, and eventually come the second or third Meet BSD at Yahoo. Neil demonstrated booting a FreeBSD ISO, which is quite cool. Finally, we have a canonical installation of FreeBSD. Whether you love or hate the official FreeBSD installer, at least finally we achieved that step, and that was good. And along the ride was a development tool, VM Run SH, which is in Share as an example, and it allows you to start up a simple system with an ISO and an 8 gig image, and it was somewhat limiting, but it's a very quick way to demonstrate what you can do with bhyve. So I slowly evolved my simple build scripts into several steps to create a guest image manually, following all the formatting and population from official distribution sets into a disk image. I could easily include, say, install world as per the jail man page, and again use a canonical system. But at every step, I found that the installers are the barrier, and so I'll share some news on that. So at bhyve.org, you've seen a gradual evolution of a menu that allows you to go through the build steps back when it was very literal, and a set of scripts, then a single script, and it's getting a little more useful. So lessons learned: script everything, and then script your strips, and test all assumptions. Before you write to a directory, make sure you can write to it, and it's been very educational for me, because I've not been a super developer, but it's certainly forced me to catch up on those skills. Put things in functions, because you'll find that you're doing the same thing over and over. And when it comes to installation, I realized late one night that I have enough installer to bootstrap real hardware. Simply because it's all the same steps. You create a disk, you make it bootable, you drop a tarball on it, and in the big picture, I started BSD in like January of '91. There was no FreeBSD, there was no Linux yet. It's BSD, and all these little subtle differences are just annoyances. So I'd rather create a Linux image from FreeBSD or an OpenBSD image from FreeBSD, and it's a shame there are subtle UFS differences, but I think maybe there's some promise in the OpenBSD UFS2 code, and I guess there was a bootability issue, but if we're booting with a user space tool of grub bhyve, I think we might get around that. So I have some testing to do there. So that evolution has ended up lately with VMRC, an RC-based management framework, and an MKVM SH provisioning script, which I will touch on. Its layout now has a config file for the host variables. It has a local directory with virtual machines, and the VM is the RC script itself, and then the vmrc directory and user local for virtual machines, distributions, and templates. So, yeah, I think you can see that. The vm.conf is specifically host variables. A few things like where your bridge networking will be and where to find those components down in vmrc. There are the virtual machines, there are distributions, absolutely off the shelf, downloaded base.txt and other distribution sets, and various templates that I will get into. And if you are using zvols on the host, the pool that you want to create those on. So in the VM directory in user local vmrc, I am using numeric differentiators as per Unix style, and they can be named whatever you please. The only issue is that one can't have various numbers in there. There may be workarounds for that. And in the distributions is absolutely off-the-shelf downloaded components right off of freebsd.org. I don't want to hand roll any of that. I don't want to get too involved. And fortunately, with the move to FreeBSD 9, all those floppy sized chunks went away and life became much easier. Guessing the names and how many there are and all that all went away, which is just great. Drop in base, drop in a kernel, and optional ones, and boot. I like that. So the templates, I'll step through this in a few slides. I specify a category of OS because under Linux you use grub to boot it rather than bhyve load. And OpenBSD has its own issues. And so I've just done categories. The most flexibility is under FreeBSD. Boot it from ISO, boot it from image, you name it. An actual off-the-shelf release version. I use that to pull down the distribution sets. Here's where to get them. Nothing special there. Oh, little typo there. ISO image, if you want to pull down an image and boot to it. Continuing, boot variables. Here are the classic variables you see when loading bhyve. How many CPUs, how much RAM, what type of console with a few options. I love the commit message. Here's the new sort of out-of-band serial console requested by everyone who's used bhyve. So one can attach to that with nmdm devices, tmux, and others. And that is appreciated, or just strictly standard I/O. But if you have several virtual machines auto-booting at startup to standard I/O, you suddenly see a lot of confusing things as it boots, reboots, starts again, and hopefully none of those hang. So it's good to detach those and attach them as needed. What type of I/O? There are to support host bridges, and there are various needs for such a thing. OpenBSD specifically wants AMD one. Additional flags, and under other OSs, the grub boot commands, Linux can need some rather lengthy specific commands, and optionally an existing device, something in dev that you want to boot off of, be it another hard drive, be it iSCSI target, you name it, something already there. And continuing, once we get into FreeBSD, we have lots of options. What type of image? Is it a disk image? Is it a zvol? Is it a device sourced elsewhere just a minute ago? Are we partitioning with fdisk or gpart? I'm being comprehensive here because if it's currently supported, I will include it, because when it comes to, say, bench testing and performance testing, well, only having UFS would be limiting, only having ZFS would be limiting, such that I want those both available at my disposal. And when issues show up, well, is it the fact that it's an MBR partition, or a ZFS MBR partition, or GPT UFS, etc. So that's completely agnostic. choice of UFS or ZFS on FreeBSD, and the size of the image if we're creating one, a pool name. I do now override that with a machine name so that it's very clear that in zpool list you have VM0 as a pool associated with that VM. A time zone, a host name, and now I'm getting more fine-grained into password and all the standard things you'd set up a system. And again, I realized this will probably work with real hardware simply because those are the steps. And all of the existing installers have some form of scriptability, but some of it's interactive, some of it's missing. BSD config, I do not believe handles password. Somewhat useful. I don't have anything fancy like encryption, but we're getting there. And is that the same? Okay, and I had been provisioning through the RC script that is still supported, but as I broke everything into functions, I found that it's useful to have a dedicated script. It can either work interactively or take in arguments and simply choose a template, choose a name if you want to override something auto-chosen like VM0. And again, that installer could likely work for virtual machines or real machines. One frustration has been that bhyve is so performant that when you hit a console, it's not clear if it's the host machine or the virtual machine. And if you reboot it, you might get, pull the rug out from under everything. And having that big green tmux bar is a really handy reminder, unless of course the host is also in tmux. But we deal. So the script, all your standard RC conventions, start, stop, status. It can also be called with the service command, which cleverly, thank God, looks through user local etc rcd, so one doesn't have to stumble through typing all that. I'm lazy, I'm clumsy, I want it safe. Attached to the consoles of detached virtual machines, mount images. It shouldn't be too hard to even mount a ZFS volume, or ZFS pool, adjust whatever settings, unmount it, boot it. I would prefer be ready to have any disk image cross my desk. If it's a Linux image that's been perhaps physical to virtual extracted from a machine, I'd rather be able to probe it, boot it, pull off the data we need, and dispose of it. So, boot to an ISO. It occurred to me that once you have this infrastructure and it's FreeBSD on FreeBSD, you can mount that image, you can use the jail command to start it up, and it'll go through the standard RC boot there and have a jail. The sky's the limit. And also kick into QEMU. Now, if you have something like, so let's say OpenBSD that might need vert.io manually configured, or a TTY manually set to be serial, it's very handy to first start in a familiar environment and then make those adjustments and then virtualize it, because often with, unfortunately, how is that TTY code coming to automatically detect if one is on serial?
Oh yeah.
It's getting there, because often it's like, wow, the whole thing booted and blank. You don't have a TTY to log into. So that's very frustrating. So things like QEMU mode are very handy. So the consoles, I touched on those briefly. Traditionally, one would just put it to standard I/O. One could put that in tmux or screen, and along came a shall we say, out-of-band serial console that one could attach to. So we've gone through this evolution of Unix and NT and Linux, and now we're back to BSD with serial consoles and all the good old stuff. So this whole effort is like exposing shortcomings in nmdm, very limited buffer sizes. So you try to paste in a script or something and you get a third of it. But hopefully people will dust off all that code that very few people were using, but hopefully will be using on a daily basis now. And of course tmux is useful, and that can either pop up captive on the screen you start or just backgrounded with a named session. So storage is storage. There are a lot of options on FreeBSD. Traditionally, raw images have been used with bhyve, but with a little nudging from, I believe, Alan and others, zvols became an option, and Peter certainly got some questions like, hey, why doesn't iSCSI work? Okay, hold on, it's just a tiny little header change. Maybe check for a few more parameters, and iSCSI images suddenly work. I found my malloc bug. I hope to fix that tonight. Should be able to just create a disk image in memory. So if you want to benchmark, say, a file system rather than a file system on a device, let's see what it looks like in memory. And of course, existing devices point, for example, an UltraBay drive at it here. I could have both my PCBSD or raw FreeBSD working simultaneously, and for decades I've wanted one keyboard for all that, and finally achieved that. That took its time. And I touched on this earlier. There are a lot of choices, and installers generally assume you want one or two. So it was not a whole lot of effort to go with any of these combinations. Just once you implemented it, it's there, it sticks, it works. And so with that flexibility, one can start experimenting very quickly with the different speeds in, say, aligned or not aligned ZFS pools. And it shouldn't be too hard to create thin, actually, I think BSD can, I showed a thin provision, 8 drive, 4 terabyte each, thin provision pool on a laptop. It's a very impressive system on paper, but a key point on paper is that you can prototype some pretty sophisticated networks on a humble laptop and conceivably push it to real hardware, which gets interesting about virtual to physical and physical to virtual. Prototype your network. I haven't experimented too much with additional network devices per VM, drives, or crazy combination of RAID Z pools of various storage supplies. So goal still remains, test it. People are frustrated that it doesn't do X or Y, but at this point, this is all kernel work still, and it's amazing what Peter and Neil have done, because that's hard. That's explosive, and when it fails catastrophically, and hopefully everyone's insulated the community from the majority of panics. And so far, fortunately, a reputation has not formed that it's in any way unreliable. It's now considered feature limited, but that's changing weekly. It's awesome. So test cases, test iSCSI, test whatever you please. And nonetheless, these things are becoming useful. So be it the RC environment, etc. Profiling. This is what my talk is about Saturday. I will not go too much into it today. Above all, keep it simple. I've come across people recommending install Nagios simply to retrieve a small amount of data or information from the system that's available within base tools. And what I'm doing is using Graphite, Carbon, and Whisper, but I'm hand rolling all of the telemetry generation, simple scripts to ask the OS itself to provide a timestamp and a level of whatnot, what's going on, be it a CPU level, be it how full your disk is, or otherwise, or VM exits, or all these little things. And by hand rolling it, I'm not waiting a year or two for the Nagios bhyve plugin, which they probably won't understand the issues at hand, and it'll come with so much overhead that that's not what I'm after. And I'm also hand generating load, lots of noisy network traffic, lots of disk I/O, just blast things at it, lots of netcat, lots of DD. And in profiling, I think we're all guilty of saying, oh, I can ping it, system's good, installation successful. If you profile your drive to work, if you sample as you're backing out of your driveway, your stats will probably look horrible. As you're on the highway for 2 minutes between those, Silicon Valley, few mile apart exits, you might have great economy, you might have great speed, and everything looks great. But as you stop at a stoplight, suddenly, wow, my gosh, your car must have failed catastrophically, let's reboot it. Well, no, just let's look at the whole picture. So it's good to think in terms of over time as opposed to just that moment. We either ping the machine, we either run, what is it, GTOP or otherwise, and just get a brief sample. And do come to my talk Saturday to hear more about that. And questions, and I can give a demo of some of these tools if you like. Any questions?
Are there anything else we plan to do with the tools? Or when are we going to see the tools in the port strip?
Using ports to distribute 2 files and a few templates is clumsy.
What it's meant for.
2 minutes work.
2 minutes work, so yes, it's getting there. It's, we'll let you be the judge if this is something useful. Let's find a console and see if we can resize it to some sane usage.
I have a port for my 1 file shell script. It's not that hard.
Oh, I know. Well, it's been evolving dramatically, so let's take a look.
Because the only thing you'd have to do is change your install script to actually use the package system with files in the right place.
Correct. So, okay, the mate terminal. Does it allow you to set title, character encoding, reset, clear? Help. Drew. Let's try another one. What other?
So is that an NVIDIA card or?
It is.
Do NVIDIA's dash settings.
It's got to redetect the. There you go.
Well, I've got that, but it gives me 64480 on that terminal, whether I like it or not. So I will
change your laptop to that. Here, you'll have one component.
Okay. I get a choice of high res. Okay, well, let's see if I can pull up another console element, another terminal, and saying application. Okay, looking at you, there must be a console. There we go. Wow, that's full screen. Aha!
Hey.
Okay, not that I can see it, but that's okay. So,
So you have that VM mount command, but there's no VM unmount.
UMount, it's there.
Ah,
Yes.
no.
So in, we all think in terms of, okay, what's the meat of it? Here are the virtual machines, and I've been experimenting with FreeBSD 10 UFS, UFS again, ZFS. So let's do VM start. Oh, yes, I started a new one. Let's try that again. What's the number on there? So that should be familiar. Let's zoom out if I can. My gosh. Oh, Drew, here's looking at you.
Settings.
Is there a simple alt plus and minus?
Under settings, you change constants.
Okay. Not that the other terminal had that. I'm clicking. Hello.
That's for you. Are you sure it's not popping up in front of you?
That's a good question, but no, let's see. Let me bring this on over one. Oh, it's tiny.
Demos, man.
Oh, yeah.
Demos.
There we go. Okay, how's that? Oh yeah. So where are we? So zpool list. We have a virtual machine with that's backed by a zpool. That patch went in pretty recently. Bless everyone's heart. Let me see if I can get us a little less screen on the bottom there. Is that a 10.1 feature or stable, you think, Peter? The zpool boot for virtual machines.
10.1. Well, it will be 10.1.
Okay. Yeah, top. It's a simple virtual machine. Let's exit that.
I notice you did not reboot your laptop.
I got the correct one, isn't it great?
Very
Very handy. So, CD. Okay, for the lazy and clumsy, we have a list of the existing virtual machines, just to remind you, a list of templates. And we'll choose one and go from there. So let's say template T, FreeBSD 11. And ZFS. I'll override the name and suggest one of, I've even kick into an editor if you want to manually take the modify the configuration file that you just created from template, and we are going through all the steps to make it bootable. Occasionally just throwing out some debug information, making sure those devices are there. It should be running the zpool create, which takes a little while. We are just running gpart now and then to see what in fact happened and what things look like. Listing what's in it, running ZFS list, running mount, seeing what's around, looking inside its mounted directory. Inside of each virtual machine under user local vmrc VM, I have a mount directory so that one can safely contain that one machine to it when mounted and not worry about conflicting with the host system. And it's provisioned. So let's see. We've got, let's do status, none are running. Oh, whoops, did I, oh, that, oops. That's Latvian host. None running, so service start. I think I grabbed the wrong loader. So are the dots from the serial-oriented loader? I don't know why I've got dots at boot, but that's a simple fix. We will go and attach. Let's see, early in the boot process. So just provisioned 11 with a few keystrokes, or I could have just done the script and put in a template name and a name override just with command line arguments. And we're in, so and last year at Asia BSDCon I predicted that if you're developing anything on FreeBSD, you'll probably be using bhyve. And I know all the FreeNAS folks are doing it, don't know about pfSense, but the fact that just in a moment you can bring in the latest and greatest. You can go back to 8.4 if you really want to. The only hang up for me has just been all those floppy sized chunks. I've got some code out there to make those work if someone really, really wants it. Yes, Jim?
So to your earlier point, is there an easy way to tell that you're actually looking at a VM or a bhyve instance? Is there a syscontrol?
Yes, there is. If, Peter, that's in it. just recently I learned about this.
I forget which one it was.
Grab.
hw.acpi.
Oh, not
Something.
Yeah, where did we- So,
Just grab bhyve. I think it's a SM bias.
oh, it is? Okay.
1 minus I to the weeks in uppercase.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's
All right, so that says you're a
No,
bhyve
is correct.
instance.
What's it?
No, that was the host.
Oh, sorry.
He called the host
Sorry.
name bhyve.
That's an A.
There it is.
Currently-
TCPI description.
Actually, no. Neil pointed out that there is a sysctl that predates bhyve for use under perhaps KVM that says, hey, I'm virtualized. And it happens to apply to bhyve. And that was news to me only a few weeks ago.
Well, the other one is the ACPI description.
Okay.
All the tables are prefixed with bhyve.
Okay.
So a canonical way would be, what is it, dev ACPI 0?
No, there is a canonical, I'm under virtualization, but I figured exactly what that
Yeah,
is.
so there was a commit that went in last week which puts, we create an SM BIOS table, so then you can use any of the SM BIOS utilities to extract it. There'll probably be other ways as well.
Okay.
There'll definitely be.
I'm sure I'll make a mistake.
Yeah.
Doing the same thing.
Well, because when I asked about it a couple of weeks ago, for jails, there's like jail.security.isjail or something like that. That lets you know you're inside a jail. Yeah, there is something, I just forget what it's called.
Yeah, you can tell that you're virtualized. That's
Right.
not so bad. But then as to which hypervisor, it's kind of hypervisor specific.
Yeah. And like the stuff you just committed, you said like makes it show up in like DMI decode
Yes,
or whatever
yes.
else tool, most automated tools like Nagios or Puppet or whatever will tell.
So the thing is also people want to hide that. They want to be able to hide the fact that you're running in hypervisor. So
Right.
then we have to try to provide that ability as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I forget exactly what, oh, some hint that you're using a VirtIO network device. All the ZFS ones, yeah, I forget what that was, but again, it predated bhyve and for under KVM and said, hey, I'm virtualized. Other questions? Any requests for this type of thing? I just prioritize my things, but yes.
You have a lot of options in your templates and so forth, and it reminds me of FFmpeg where they have just a jillion options, and then they came and they made little identifiers that are an option package, and you say whatever it is, XGA or
Right.
that encapsulates a standard options package that look like this, and then some other one that looks like that.
Yes. So fortunately, inherently, FreeBSD has a few choices. There's the games disk set, if you really want to add that in. So that's a short string of possible distribution sets. I haven't implemented it, but I will shim for standard packages so that you can drop those in. Thanks to Baptiste, there's a whole lot of options there. I don't know, I'm not sure if I want to go down that road of all the nifty things one can do with packaging on FreeBSD, but it's very promising stuff.
I saw you had an option to start the virtual machine in the QEmuter.
Yes.
If you have one for starting it in jail.
Yes, I said that.
Well, I didn't see it on the slide.
Well, it was there. It was
Yeah,
there.
the second to last thing, I think, on this one.
Let me stay there. Let me see if I have the UFS one. Where?
You're inside bhyve.
Oh, you're right. I'm in again. I'll get rid of this guy. I'm in 11 current as of just the other day. About those groups of things, one thing I could use, and I would love to turn elsewhere for this, is say zpool templates. Just so that somewhere between here are your resources, here are your controllers, and I want to do a stripe of mirrors split between the controllers and have some awareness of that. And currently you have to hand roll all that even in, say, FreeNAS. Quite a few people request that, so yeah, it should be there.
That's something that Spectra Logic was working on for ZSD, because currently FreeBSD doesn't really know physically where that drive is connected and what the topology looks like.
10 UFS.
You've got VM.
Yes, I did. And now I can barely type MV for move because it's always VM. It's like, stop. Let's see what happened. Mount, unmounted, destroying what memory devices? Running the command. I probably didn't throw in mount devfs. I haven't tested that very recently. It didn't find it and freaked out, but currently I just have it kicking into a shell. If anything, so if you just want to change one thing before boot, get in, get out, go back to what you're doing.
Yeah, because the
all those
package system, you can say, install this package in this jail or whatever.
Yes. And I don't know if a whole lot changed in jails for 10, but there's all the idea of the virtual networking and the jail networking, and I just hope to leverage what's there, what's ever in the base, and that's so far worked pretty well. Having standard conventions rather than reinventing the wheel is always good. Again, the zvols templates, just to say, here's the goal.
There's one in BSD install that I wrote.
Okay.
Right.
And I'm sure SmartOS has a few.
Right.
So
ours is a shell variable that defines what the pool looks like.
can you
It's
drop
not very elegant.
a pool on 2 controllers for stripe of mirrors?
What we're doing is for creating the data sets once you have a pool.
Ah, yes, and data sets. Dozens and dozens of data sets, Alan.
No, we cut the number down because people were...
Good, okay, yeah, it was like, wait a minute, that's a bit ambitious. So, other questions, suggestions, requests, hate mail? Anyway, Jim, it sounds like, and I asked you at every conference, it sounds like currently the certification group has a solution, but I don't know if something like this may help the BSD professional certification.
Well, we're using QEMU at the moment.
We got that.
Yeah, we'll look at this.
And long ago, someone asked if Minix was supported, and I forgot about the question, but we now have 32-bit guest support. So suddenly, Peter, beyond virt.io, there are a whole lot of options between MSI, etc., to get, say, Minix for those who really want to run Minix going.
Yeah, so FreeBSD i386 actually doesn't make any BIOS calls. If you pass it an E820 memory map from the loader. So we still don't support BIOS in bhyve, so if any 32-bit OSs generally will make BIOS calls to retrieve information. So as soon as they do that, it just doesn't work.
And so that's unique to FreeBSD that it can bypass BIOS.
It is actually, so even Lumos 64-bit still makes BIOS calls.
So how is Illumos support coming for guests?
No, we put it on the side for a while.
Oh, okay.
There's a critical timing calibration that it does, that it uses one of our user space timers to try to calibrate the TSC, and there's too much jitter when you do that,
sure.
And it actually it measures that, and then it claims that it's not a reliable source, and it just panics. So the goal is to move the 8254 timer into the kernel, where we get away from the jitter issue. So that work is ongoing,
Okay.
and we won't bother trying to run it again.
And I'm very impressed that no one asked about Windows support. Any news on that front?
No.
No, okay, fair enough. There are rumors, I'll just leave it at that. So, other questions? We welcome involvement. I mean, some very, very meaningful patches have come out of various circles, and I think everyone appreciates that and may not fully understand how significant some of those are, because when they're 2 key developers, they have their priorities and they keep the trains running on time, but they definitely do not have every piece of hardware out there. Alan has kindly provided some server access. I've done some AMD work, testing, and we need that kind of help. And there's a lot of exciting talk of cloud things out there, but we have to have the basic fundamentals working as best they can. And fortunately, they're working very, very well, but let's verify that and verify that again, and just make sure that this is our long-term solution for guys like me who have been picturing this for over a decade, but being very, very frustrated with all the available solutions. So it's break time, thank you, and I hope to see you Saturday where you can hear more about my visualizing all this in action.
Okay, so we have 10 minutes break until 50.
Restrooms are down where you entered. There's women's on the left on one side of the elevators, men's on the other.
And soft drink is on the ground floor.
And the
Not
vending
this
machine on the ground
floor.
floor. I will leave the adapter up here for whoever might need that, but let's not forget it at the end. Okay. You got it right. It comes out of the machine. No, it's fine. Are there? Are there advantages?